Sam&Cents. Money that finally makes sense. Stop checking whether the number in your savings account went down. It didn't. It never does. And that steady, unchanging number is exactly how the slowest kind of loss stays invisible. 17 centuries ago, Roman families trusted their money for the same reason you trust yours. The coins looked right. The familiar silver shine, the emperor's face, the same kind of coin their parents had used, except it wasn't the same coin. Tonight we're doing an autopsy on Rome's money, and by the end you'll understand what a dead empire's pocket change has to do with the cash sitting in your account right now, and why one emperor's last resort was carving prices into stone. Here's the trap you're living in. Your balance says the same 10,000 it said last year, so it feels safe. But your grocery receipt doesn't say what it said last year. Rent doesn't. Insurance doesn't. The number held still while everything it has to pay for moved. Now, I want to be straight with you before we go back in time. Rome's money and yours run on completely different machinery, and I'll show you exactly where the comparison ends. But the trap itself, a label that stays put while what it commands drifts, that trap is ancient. Because here's the reframe, money has never really been the number on it. Roman silver coins didn't even carry a stamped numeral the way your cash does. Their value rode on convention, the coin's name, its weight, and the portrait that vouched for it. And that's what makes Rome the perfect forensic case. Across 2.5 centuries, Roman mints kept the familiar monetary conventions and the imperial portraits, while the metal content inside changed. Line the coins up in order, put them under a microscope, and you can watch trust being drained out of an empire, issue by issue. Start around the year 64 under the Emperor Nero. This is where modern lab work gives us hard numbers. 2 archaeometallurgists, Kevin Butcher and Matthew Ponting, drilled tiny samples from the cores of dated denarii past the surface, which can be deceptively silver-rich, and measured what was actually inside. Older general summaries put earlier 1st century denarii at roughly 93.5% silver, though that was never one universal intended standard. Around 64, Nero's reform reduced the weight of the denarius, and the main post-reform issues assay near 80% silver in the core. And here's the wrinkle the smooth textbook line misses. A final substantial issue late in Nero's reign was struck at about 90% again. Real history is jagged, and honest charts show dated points, not one smooth slide. So why did Nero's mint do it? This is where I have to be honest with you. The Great Fire had devastated Rome that same year. There was rebuilding on a colossal scale, military spending, an expensive court. All of that is context. None of it is proof. On the evidence, we cannot say the fire caused the reform. I call this story the coin that lied, but hear that as a metaphor for what happened to trust, not a verdict on anyone's intentions. Because an emperor's motive is the one thing you cannot drill a sample out of. What we can measure is the metal, and the metal kept moving. Fast forward to Septimius Severus, around the year 200. The empire's biggest bill was the army, and it was growing. Under Severus, military expenditure increased sharply, and coin output expanded amid that pressure. The historian Cassius Dio reports that Severus, at the end of his life, advised his sons to stay on good terms with each other, enrich the soldiers, and disregard everyone else. We can't know his exact words, and army pay was a major pressure rather than the whole story. But the budget behind the reported advice was real, and soldiers were paid in coin. Then his son Caracalla made the move that gives this story its cleanest piece of evidence. Around 215, a new coin appeared, the antoninianus. Note the switch. From here on, the object in our autopsy is no longer the denarius. The new coin wore a radiate crown, and it is generally understood to have been tariffed at 2 denarii. But it held roughly 1.5 times the silver of a contemporary denarius, a denarius that was itself already debased. A bigger claim on the front, less metal behind the claim than the arithmetic implied. Then the 3rd century hit Rome with everything at once: plague, invasions on multiple frontiers, civil wars, and a carousel of short-lived emperors, disrupted production and strained revenues. Nobody should tell you debasement did this. The crisis was brutally multi-causal, and the coinage was as much a symptom as a cause. But you can read the fever on the coins themselves. Core analyses of dated issues show the antoninianus sliding below 50% silver, and by specified late 3rd century issues, some antoniniani contained under 5%. The exact figure varies by mint, by issue, and by whether you test the surface or the core. Under Gallienus in the 260s, the object hits bottom. Laboratory analyses of certain antoninianus issues of his reign, measured in the core, with the figure depending on which mint and issue you sample, because mints could enrich the surface so that a nearly copper coin left the die looking silver, found roughly 2 to 5% silver. Hold that coin in your mind. The portrait is still crisp. The shine, when new, still red as silver. Practically all of the substance is gone. The conventions survived, the metal didn't. That is the coin that lied. And remember, the lie lives in the object, not in any motive we can prove. 2 honest footnotes before the empire strikes back. First, prices did not move 1-for-1 with silver content. Roman money already ran partly on custom, law, and trust, the way all money does, so the coin's metal and the market's prices were connected, not chained. Second, debasement did not destroy Rome. The Western Empire carried on for nearly 2 more centuries, and its eventual end was massively multi-causal. What broke in the 3rd century was something more specific: confidence in what the money claimed to be. Enter Diocletian, the great reorganizer, and here's the part the popular version gets backwards. He did try to fix the money. After and alongside sweeping reforms of the coinage and currency system, Diocletian then reached for something more theatrical. In the year 301, he imposed an empire-wide schedule of maximum prices. The reconstructed text is a monster. About 1,400 price and wage entries, pieced together from more than 40 inscription fragments found across the eastern provinces. The city of Aphrodisias alone supplies roughly 40% of what survives. The preamble blames greed. The threatened penalties were severe, and the text frets openly that runaway prices were devouring soldiers' pay. So did stone-beat arithmetic, not durably. The edict did not produce lasting price stability. But be careful with the famous version of its failure. The vivid details, blood spilled over small transactions, goods vanishing from the markets, come to us from Lactantius, a hostile Christian polemicist, with every reason to make Diocletian look monstrous. Treat that as an enemy's testimony, not an established empire-wide fact. And resist the tidy takeaway that price controls always fail everywhere. The evidence here can't carry a universal law. The defensible conclusion is narrower, and I think more chilling. An emperor could engrave a ceiling into stone in every market square, and still not command trust back into his money, and the temptation Rome dramatized never retired, it just changed costumes. On Henry VIII's debased testoons, a thin silvered surface could wear away at the portrait's nose and expose the copper beneath. His own subjects called him Old Copper Nose. That great debasement began under Henry VIII in 1544 and continued under his son Edward VI until 1551. And by mid-November 1923, at the height of German hyperinflation, bread cost more than 230 billion marks. Different centuries, different monetary systems, different mechanisms, the same pressure on whoever issues the money. Which brings us to you, and to the sentence I refuse to say. I am not telling you that modern central banks are debasing coins. When a central bank runs quantitative easing, it creates reserves electronically and buys securities to influence financial conditions. That is a different machine. No metal is removed, much of it can be unwound, and it does not translate automatically into consumer prices. Inflation in your world depends on demand, credit, expectations, government budgets, and supply, not on one lever. The honest overlap between Nero's Rome and your bank app is exactly one thing, and it's the thing this whole story is about. The unit can keep its name and its face, while what it buys quietly changes. So let's assay your money the way Butcher and Ponting assayed Rome's. Run a clean illustration, steady rate math, not a forecast. At a constant 3% inflation, $100 of today's purchasing power buys about $74 worth in 10 years, 55 in 20, and 41 in 30. At that pace, money loses half its purchasing power roughly every 23.5 years. One working career, half the substance gone. No emperor required. And that's not a scare hypothetical. Using US Consumer Price Index annual averages, 172.2 for the year 2000 against 313.689 for 2024, the most recent complete year, A $100 basket of goods from 2000 cost about $182 in 2024. Same dollar, same name on it, different reach. Here's the number that actually matters, and almost nobody computes it. The real return. If your cash earns 4% while inflation runs 3%, your gain is not 1%. It's 1.04 divided by 1.03 minus 1, about 0.97%. A small correction, but it's the honest number. And remember, your personal inflation, your rent, your groceries, your life, can run hotter or cooler than the national average, and future rates aren't promised to anyone. Now, do not walk away thinking cash is the villain. Cash is oxygen. For emergencies and near-term bills, nothing else does its job, and the real lesson of Rome is not never hold coins. The fix is to give every dollar a date. Money you need now stays liquid, and you accept the slow erosion as the fair price of safety. Money for a dated goal a few years out goes into high-quality tools matched to that date, and money you truly won't touch for decades is the money that can afford to own diversified productive assets and ride out their swings. If you're in the United States, two tools are built for exactly this problem, and both come with real constraints. Treasury inflation-protected securities adjust with the consumer price index, but their market price can fall if you sell before maturity, and in a taxable account the inflation adjustments are taxed as they accrue. Series I savings bonds track inflation too, but electronic purchases are capped at $10,000 per person per year. Your money is locked for the first 12 months, and cashing out before 5 years costs you the last 3 months of interest. Useful tools, not magic, and no single hedge, not gold, not property, not last year's winner, deserves your whole balance and never with leverage. So here's your one move this week, and it takes 5 minutes. Open the account that holds your largest pile of cash and write down the date you'll actually need that money. If there's no date within a few years, that balance is a Gallienus coin in the making. A proud face on the front, the job quietly draining out of the core. Give it a date, or give it a different job. And next time we go further back and higher up the ladder, to medieval England, where every acre of land ultimately traced back to the king and every landlord was somebody's tenant. What a king's rent roll has to do with your mortgage payment is stranger than you think. Subscribe so you don't miss it. So there it is, small boring moves that quietly win. If your money makes a little more sense now, hit subscribe to Sam&Cents. And the next one's right here, it picks up right where this leaves off. See you there.